So why do most Indian men have pot bellies? Now, I have done another video on this previously, but I have some new information that goes beyond just eating too many carbs. So to get more accurate information about this topic, I'm bringing on Dr. Roshani, who is an endocrinologist that actually lives in India. Doc, thanks for coming on. I wanted to just say hello and good to see you again.
Yes, thanks for having me, Dr. Eric. It's been great to connect and be in touch again.
Yeah, I wanted to really talk about what's happening in India, especially related to belly fat. And I know it's a big problem all over the world, but especially in India for several reasons. I did a video on this before, and this is kind of a part two, because there's some additional information after talking with you that I found out that I think I want to share that goes a little bit beyond just lowering your carbohydrates, trying to lose weight. So we're going to talk about that as well. I think you were born in the US, but then you lived half of your life in India. You treat people as a medical doctor and as an endocrinologist. So I'm so glad that I have someone who actually can give me firsthand knowledge of what's happening in India. So can you just kind of give people an overview of the type of health problems that we're running into in India of having protruded bellies?
Oh, yes, there's a lot we can cover there, Dr. Eric. It's actually no longer, type 2 diabetes is obviously something that comes into our world a lot as endocrinologists. We deal with, PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome. We deal now with seeing younger and younger people getting sick from insulin resistance. Even people who shouldn't be getting insulin resistance, we think of someone with type 1 diabetes, we see them getting insulin resistance. So India is not immune to what the rest of the world is seeing. We have little children now. There are some states in India that have 1 in 3 children with high triglycerides and fatty liver already on sonography. And the protruding belly is hitting these young children right from when they're little. And it's part of it could be nature, part of it could be genetic tendency, but a lot of it, if you take it in the right way, is good news. It's environmental. It's something we have control over in terms of our lifestyle and our choices. But a lot of lifestyle changes are coming in where insulin resistance, protruding bellies, we're seeing it across the board. The diabetes metabolic crisis in India is exploding. We may not be the most obese country in the world, but we're up there in the top 5 in terms of maximum cases of type 2 diabetes, as well as cardiometabolic, so early cardiac issues.
I'm just dying to ask you this one question about that because, just to keep this really simple, I'm assuming that most people know this, but they might not. When you eat carbohydrates in excess amounts, it triggers the hormone called insulin, and then insulin is the hormone that not only stores fat, but it prevents you from burning fat. Okay, so that's what insulin is. But here's my question. When you went through medical school, then you studied endocrinology. When a doctor goes through this intensive medical training, especially on insulin, which is the main hormone, but somehow it gets kind of disconnected when you get into the carbohydrate triggering insulin. And I mean, it's just obvious when you step back now and look at it like, okay, so if you have too much fat, obviously you have too much insulin. But in medical school, I don't know, tell me what happens when someone is taught that. And as far as an average medical doctor or an average endocrinologist, and somehow they don't connect the dots to lowering your carb.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I had to look back to understand where did my basics of first year of medical school from biochemistry, where carbohydrate was the food group that triggers the maximum insulin response or the maximum insulin requirement. There was a disconnect from learning that in first year of medical school till the time we came to second year where we were studying pharmacology. Already there was a disconnect where we were memorizing the types of insulin, the NPH, the quick acting, the long acting, the newer molecules, how to prescribe them. And then in third year medical school, we went into internal medicine and we had Harrison's textbook, and it was very little time spent on the lifestyle aspect and much more time spent on the prescription aspect. Whether it was the presence of pharmaceutical representatives in our clinics, funding or doing these little reminders of what to prescribe. There was very little time or energy in my medical school training for nutrition beyond the first year. And then MD medicine, internal medicine in the hospital, people who are sick and admitted, they're sick enough to be admitted to hospital. Really, the concept of doing lifestyle discussion or nutrition discussion wasn't really relevant in a way. It sounds bad, but here's somebody who's really sick. They're like, lying in a hospital bed, getting hospital trays. It's not seeming like the right time to talk about nutrition or carbohydrates. They're eating what's on the plate. And then I went into fellowship to become an endocrinologist, an insulin specialist.
Right.
And I'm still prescribing medicine, but I've not had the training hands-on how to change nutrition.
So this is mind-blowing because I went through pre-med, but I didn't go to medical school. I went to chiropractic college. There's just not enough time to really learn the information. I had to pass the test. I had to memorize and get on to the next test because there's so much information being crammed down our throats. But you don't have time to really go out and let me apply this theory and also how can we use this information practically? It's just not talked about. So I guess what you're saying is like you're taught this information, but then there's just a disconnect on the diet part or the food part.
A big disconnect.
Or the nutrition part.
Yeah. I wouldn't say that doctors were getting hardcore or thorough nutrition training. I wouldn't say that.
There must have been a point when you graduated, you're going out there just doing what you were taught. There must have been a shift. Can you tell us what happened at that point? Yes.
So I noticed, when I was an endocrine fellow, that we as fellows in training would run around one side of the corridor, running into the patient rooms to do the consults and then talk to our senior doctors and get the sign off on the medication changes we wanted to make. And one of the prescriptions we would write along with the insulin or the medications for diabetes, for example, was go to this diabetes class. And I was like, well, that's interesting. There's a class and it's on the other side of this corridor. Luckily for me, it was on the same campus in the same building. And so as I was graduating, I got permission to go and sit in on some of these classes by the diabetes educators because I was curious about the behavioral elements and what are they teaching over there that might be useful to my patient that I'm asking them to take up time and come again to take this educational course. So I was having a bit of FOMO, like I didn't want to miss out on what was being said. So that was my first exposure to the impact of nutrition. And Dr. Berg, it's almost like a paradox. It's like I had blinders on. Because endocrinologists are the most trained doctors when it comes to treating people with type 1 diabetes. When I have to prescribe insulin for someone who's, right? And over there, we're taught insulin carbohydrate ratio, which means for how many grams of carbohydrate, how many grams of insulin am I trying to give this patient? And I teach the patient that is how much they need to be injected for that meal. And yet this knowledge stayed there and it didn't come out until much later when I was like, wait a minute, that's a secret formula. If I lower the carbs, I lower the insulin. It was right in front of my face.
God.
Okay.
I mean, the same thing with like if you're talking about a type 1 diabetic, right? They have to take insulin because they don't have insulin. So they can't regulate the sugars because insulin lowers the blood sugar. So obviously this is the amount of insulin you take is dependent on how much carbohydrate you eat. What you're talking about is that information just did not quite sink in right away.
It didn't move to other parts of my career. It just stayed in this place. And so in type 1, when I was working with someone, I would say, hey, if you don't want so much insulin because you're gaining weight, you're getting this bit of a belly, you started out normal weight. A lot of people start out normal weight, and then the higher the insulin dose goes in type 1, they start gaining weight. And so we would say, well, if you reduce your carbs, we're going to have to give you less insulin. So that was an obvious thing there, but it just didn't translate to all areas of my career until later, where a series of events, when I decided to move from the United States to India, that's when a bulb went on, is, I love these classes that my patients are getting in Chicago, and I want to learn that so I can carry the educational material to India. I don't want to just carry my insulin prescribing knowledge and medicine prescribing. I want to know the education piece because I felt like that would connect me to the culture in India. If I did the education myself, I would listen, I would hear, I would understand what's going on in India because I'd been out of India for 10 years. And so I wanted to use the educator hat to connect back with my culture. through those listening experiences, I started hearing what was going on with people's nutrition. And that really started in 2011. And by 2013, I was just making a lot of progress with helping people realize that if they want to avoid more medicines or getting onto insulin in type 2 diabetes, we had to show them the relationship between carbohydrates and the insulin that was giving them this gaining of belly and all this weight gain in the wrong areas.
Wow. Okay, so fast forward, you're in India. Let's talk about carbohydrates. There's a lot of carbohydrates in the world, but definitely I think, and when you go to a restaurant, you have different cultural festivals. You have everything kind of revolves around carbohydrates. What are the top carbs that the Indians eat?
How about I walk you through breakfast, lunch, dinner, like that? Is that okay? So what is considered a light breakfast, because we've been as affected by the low fat, low calorie, unfortunate messaging that went around probably from the 1970s. India has been listening to that and has been badly affected by trying to do a calorie or a low fat approach. So they think low fat or light breakfast is preferred, which ends up being a lot of carbohydrates. So breakfast options include idli, dosa, upama, poha. Some people might do if you're from the north of India, you might do a paratha or like a piece of bread or a roti. If you're from my area of the state, which is Gujarat, you might do like a spicy kind of a bread, like a thepla. Some people love to have thepla. These are some common breakfast items. If you're trying to go healthy, you might do cornflakes, or you might do muesli, and you might do juice. Some people will do a bowl of fruit. Some people are told in India, stay with only fruit in the first half of the day. So they'll load up on their fruits in the morning, or they'll go for their morning walks and then they'll have a fruit juice to sort of power that walk. Again, these are all carbohydrates, all processed and refined. Some of them sugar. Oats, people have taken to reading and hearing that oats are heart healthy, and that same messaging has been in India as well. So they might do instant quick cooking oats, and then they might do versions of that where they do oats upama or oats idli. So they think that by adding the oats into the other Indian dishes, they're doing something better than just the rice or the wheat. So that's just breakfast. And I probably missed two. I probably missed some. Yeah. If we go to lunch, and some people do a mid-morning snack. Again, if they're being health conscious, they may have been told to have a fruit as a mid-morning snack.
If you do that breakfast, 1.5 hours later, you're going to need a snack because it's going to put you in a state of hunger.
Yes, because of that big insulin spike in the morning and you're hungry. And this is the classic pattern I see is small, frequent meals, hungry all day, cannot go more than 3 hours, 4 hours without feeling hungry and wanting something, cravings, a lot of cravings. Lunch typically is either roti or rice. Some people, if they're, again, health conscious, they may be switching from wheat, they may be switching to millets. And the government of India is, trying to actually promote more millet usage. I'm okay with the millet if it would be a whole grain where you can actually see the millet. But a lot of these have been pulverized into a powder and they're being converted into snacks or, again, roti or flatbread made from flour. So you've done a lot of processing to these grains or millets. So you have some form of a flatbread or rice with a side of maybe a vegetable or a dal if you're vegetarian. If you're carrying lunch from home, one good thing that I still see in India is a lot of people carry lunch from home. But we have a very hot climate. So someone who's cooking for you in the morning, or you're cooking your own lunch and carrying it in lunch, usually you don't want it to be something very liquidy or that's going to spill or leak or go bad. So it might be more on the dry side. So you end up not having a lot of protein in these lunches very commonly. If you're not careful, you'll end up being protein deficient at lunch as well. There's just basically maybe a grain or a processed grain and some vegetable. Maybe if you eat animal protein, you'll have a small amount of animal protein at lunch.
And then is there a mid-afternoon snack?
Oh, yeah. So again, this is where a lot of hunger pangs hit people. I give a survey to all of my patients when they come in, like an intake form, and so many people mark off that 5 o'clock is the worst, 4 o'clock is the worst. So we have a chai culture in India where we love our chai. And so the afternoon or, mid-evening, early evening, 4 o'clock, 3 o'clock chai, a lot of people want to have some dry, crunchy, munchy snacks. Again, these may be light because they're fat-free and they're like baked and roasted and not versus fried. So people think it's good for you. This could be puffed rice. It could be millet flakes, millet chips, a lot of these crunchy, snacky things that people want. Maybe if you're trying to be healthy, you might do a fruit.
And then for dinner?
For dinner, again, not everybody prioritizes protein at dinner. Sometimes, again, I'm a Gujarati, so I know them the most. Again, highly vegetarian by preference and by culture. So dinner, they don't want the sort of bread, like the flat bread and the vegetable and the dal combo. They want variety at night. So they might do a variation of a pizza or a pasta or a lasagna or a Mexican dish. I'm going to use some Indian words here because, this is for them, is like ragda patties, which is a lentil soup and potato fritters, you could call them. We're looking at a lot of carbohydrates.
So if we take a look at a carbohydrate, I think there's a really big confusion on what a carbohydrate is because it's not just one thing. It's basically three things to keep it simple. You have fiber, that's a carbohydrate. You have sugar, which is a carbohydrate. But there's a third thing. If you deduct the fiber and the sugar, there's something else that's left. And this is what I think people they're not aware of what that is. And that would be a starch. And what is a starch? Starch is a bunch of sugar. It's more sugar. It's more hidden sugar, especially if the way that they process it around the world. So if we talk about how much sugar an actual person is consuming, it's a lot per day. But if we include the starches and we look at the percentage of calories of combined carbohydrates, and that's all the carbohydrates, we're looking at what is it, 60, 70, maybe even 80% or more of their calories are carbs, right?
Unfortunately, yes. Especially if you're vegetarian and you've just not met someone who's educating you about lowering your carbs, your default Indian choices are going to be more than half carbs.
Wow. How can someone start lowering their carb? Because obviously we need to reduce insulin to solve this problem. Live in India and actually do this and actually maintain a vegetarian lifestyle. We want to talk about that. There's a second problem that you've mentioned to me, what some of these foods do to our digestive system. Like we get a lot of bloating and it's going to make you look like you're pregnant. You're going to give you a pot belly. Do you see that in your practice? People coming in with distended stomachs?
Every day, Dr. Berg, every day. And again, in that intake form, because I'm, internal medicine base always, and then an endocrinologist after. So I ask about all the organ systems because I want to look at you as a whole. So I'm asking about digestive symptoms, and we did a little analysis of our practice. And I was surprised that the topmost complaint people had when they came in was digestive complaints. And I was like, I'm not a gastroenterologist, but they're suffering from this. The good news was, even though they came in with the gas, the bloating, the distended belly, it would go in and out 2-3 inches depending on what they ate. We've been able to sort of crack how to help them see that phenomenon change just by working on their food.
The problem is, and I'm sure you probably see this, a lot of your patients are on antibiotics or PPIs, and it just gets worse and worse and worse. So then what happens is you get this overgrowth, right, of all this candida and stuff. And now we're in a situation where if they just eat a little bit of fiber, they're going to feel like there's a balloon in their stomach. A human or an animal or even an insect will continue to eat until they satisfy their protein requirements. So do you see this in your practice?
Every day. I see people, again, not satiated from their meals, wanting something more. Sometimes they describe this as cravings, sweet cravings. They somehow they want more sugar and sweet. And I suspect it's because they've just not been nourished. They're still looking for that energy somehow. And protein should not be used for energy, but there's something that's getting misinterpreted as wanting to seek out sugar. And when you're dealing with the high insulin that we talked about, adding more sugar just keeps you really stuck in this same vicious cycle. But I've been doing diet recalls for my patients and counting their nutrition since 2011 myself, because I was, the educator for my patients since 2011. And in India, I see people coming in, when they first see me, most of them are less than 50 grams of protein per day, and a very large majority of them are getting less than 25 grams, 25 grams of protein per day.
This is interesting because when someone gets enough protein, they're going to be satisfied, and the likelihood of them snacking, and like if they went on a low carb diet now without satisfying the protein, it's going to be really hard to fix that problem.
Exactly, because you're taking someone who's hungry all the time and you're telling them to reduce their carbohydrates. But then
Right.
so
And so like how are they going to be satisfied, right? Yeah.
right, exactly. So what I've learned is to flip the process as, yes, they're high on carbohydrates, but that's all they're using to sort of almost like mechanically fill the stomach with something and feel that stretch.
Right.
And, it's very interesting because I think this is the origin of the myth that happens in India or circulates in India, is that protein is heavy. And I'm sure that when they say protein is heavy, what they haven't understood is that's what satiety is supposed to feel like. It's supposed to fill you up. And so when we increase the protein, they start feeling full, and they're finally like, oh, I'm done. I don't need more.
The thing that turned me around, because I used to live on pure carbs, huge muffin for breakfast and cereal, and I would do that. It took me until 11 o'clock in the morning until I can wake up mentally. And then one day I started having protein for breakfast, and boy, that was like a miracle. I can actually wake up. How does someone, being a vegetarian, increase the amount of protein to start the day off right?
Yes, this is again something we're trying to solve for every day in practice. And we'll stick to vegetarian because it's so much easier. And you've got so much content out for your audience about how if you are okay with animal protein, it's just so much easier to get your protein to happen at each meal. But the unique problem is for someone who's, choosing to be vegetarian. Within India, there are some vegetarians who are okay with eggs, and there are some who will not even go near eggs. Just it's absolutely against their belief systems, and I cannot even get them to take eggs, which would be a really good quality whole protein for them. So many vegetarians in India are okay with dairy, and so we use that a lot.
Let's just talk about like specific types of foods that they can have related to dairy.
Right. And, Dr. Berg, one of the things I've done is I try to reduce the habit friction. So I kind of look at what they're already eating so that they don't have to all of a sudden flip their grocery list and do something out of the way that's not going to match their running kitchen. India is a lot of large families living under one roof, a lot of different tastes and preferences, a lot of actively running kitchens all day long. So the idea is to not shut down the cooking system that's working, but to start with baby steps. I know what would be ideal is to get these people to 1.2 grams of protein at least per kg body weight per day, every day. But sometimes I have to start with, if I'm trying to get to 80 or 90 or 100 grams of protein, but I'm starting at 20, I'm like, how can we make this 30? How can we, from your existing menu? So I'll look at what dairy they have. I'll look at what legumes they have. I'll show them how, okay, these come with some natural carbohydrates. And I make them use my app. And I made my own app because the existing apps out there, they do a lot of calorie counting. And as an endocrinologist, we want them to focus on carbs and proteins and the hormonal basis for why their belly's coming out, and not the calorie way, because just reducing calories just hasn't worked. And my app is populated with Indian foods, and me and my team have counted out each food, and we keep adding new things to the back end to show you your carbs and proteins. So we're like, put your foods in and you'll start to see where you are on your carbs for the day, where you are on the proteins for the day. Let's see if you can start dialing your existing proteins up. So that means if you took legumes, double them. If you took these carbs, can you have them? And that's like the easiest way for me to get them started.
And so obviously we have the yogurt. Do you do kefir as well?
It's available. It's a bit of almost like a privileged food here. It's not easily available everywhere. So I wouldn't say it's something that the masses of India are going to be able to access. It's maybe in the very health conscious big cities in the refrigerators.
Okay, so then we're talking about like yogurt and then cheese.
Yes, they'll do milk, they'll do yogurt, they do homemade Indian paneer cheese, which is like the fresh, you split the milk, curdle the milk, and you get this fresh paneer.
I can get by with a meal with and do just fine with cheese. So cheese, I do a lot of cheese in my diet, and that's a really good protein source too, because when you have cheese that is fermented, it eats up a lot of the milk sugar.
Then sure, you can sneak in some nuts and seeds and nut butters, but if you're pure vegetarian, I know we're not going to reach 1.2 grams per kilo body weight without adding a protein supplement.
Yeah.
And people will
Okay.
say, oh, you should avoid powders and you should avoid processed food, and I agree. But in a world where we're not touching animal protein, you're touching processed carbohydrates anyway. You're touching flours, you're touching packaged, shelf stable things that are just not fresh. They're like instant eat, there's no cooking required. If we're going to choose processed, maybe this is the one vice, is to take a protein supplement. And from all of those, whey is really not that processed if you think about it. It's just dehydrated liquid from when you split the milk out and get the solids out. The liquid is the whey. So that would be the least processed.
It's actually a complete protein as well. So I think that's a great thing to do. So let's say a person wanted to get a good amount of their protein from whey. I guess it would list it on the label how much they would need, but I don't know if you have any simple ways that would they...
Yeah, so one scoop gives you the typical way the packaging comes here. One scoop gives you about 25 grams. And so the way I ask
Okay.
you to do the math here is if I've given them a target of 1.2, let's take a 60 kilogram person. We're aiming for 70 to 75 grams. I usually go on the higher end of estimating for them because they're plant-based, it's vegetarian. I know the availability of these is a bit on the lower side. 1.2, and then I'll just like throw in an extra 5 or 10 just to make an easy number. So 75. So 75, I can divide that easily, 25, 25, 25, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Might be that you need the whey protein scoop if you find that when you do your math for the day is you know what you're going to eat. You know you're going to have some legumes and some lentils. You know you're going to have some paneer, some soft fresh cheese. You do the math, or some people have started plugging it into my app as they plan the day, is, oh, that's going to get me to 40. So I'm short by 30 or 35. So then they'll do a scoop or a scoop and a half of the protein shake.
By starting with the protein, you're going to start being satisfied. If someone's willing to do eggs, how many eggs? Because some people are concerned about cholesterol, right? So why don't you mention that point?
Yeah, I mean, there are days, Dr. Berg, that I eat 8 or 10 eggs a day. If I haven't thought about what to eat or what to make or cook, I'm like, you know what, it's just easier. Let me just do the eggs, right? And
Yeah.
there's been no real link that dietary cholesterol raises the bad cholesterol. This is a myth that even the American Heart Association has come out and backed off from saying. It was sort of bad information told to us in the 70s, and it just really stuck. So I have to reassure them is it's not the eggs that we're going to worry about. We're going to look at other things to make sure you're healthy from a cardiac standpoint.
Oh, that's great. Now, in India, do they have a lot of, let's say, tofu, things like that? Is that an option or no?
It is. Again, I would say that it's an acquired taste in India. Tofu versus paneer, it's texturally different. The flavor is different. I love tofu because of the profile it has in terms of carbs and proteins. So we have a lot of tofu in our house. It's also one of those things that if you're using non-GMO soybeans can be expensive. So if you're finding there are Indian made, and India actually produces quite a bit of soybeans, and a colleague of mine told me that India does non-GMO soybeans. And so if you can get local Indian made tofu, it's picking up in popularity now. So you're getting tempeh now in India as well. And the Indians are really into their spice. So you get ready to eat tempeh that's been flavored and seasoned with like Indian spice profiles so that they can hide the taste of the tempeh, because that's a bit funky to get used to. So the big cities do have tofu and tempeh.
So let's roll right into digestive problems. I know one of the great things about India is the spices. And you have turmeric, for example, that help with bloating, help with digestion. And so that probably offsets some of the things. I know even in America, when you go to an Indian restaurant, they will give you some spices after. Of course, it's coated in sugar, but you're consuming spices to kind of help some with the bloating. Is there a common spice that Indians use after they eat?
Every kitchen starts with turmeric. Every meal has turmeric. Every day there's turmeric. Every day. But we still have digestive problems. We have cumin in almost everyday cooking. There's a small community within India that won't touch onions and garlic. They have religious beliefs around that. You did mention about the antibiotics and PPIs. The good and bad about India is these things are available over the counter. So people,
Wow.
yeah, people self-prescribe.
Wow. I think what's happening, especially that you just told me that information, if someone has taken an antibiotic sometime in their life, now you're going to limit the microbes that are going to help you digest. And so over time, now you can't digest this. Now you're getting gas from that. And then those microbes need to be replaced. Another thing that we want to talk about is like fermented foods. Are there fermented foods in India?
Yes. The ones I prescribe are somewhat imported in the sense that they come from other cultures like the sauerkraut, kefir, or the kimchi. In terms of Indian fermented foods, there are some, but again, they can tend to be on the spicy side. So the fermented yogurt is one, like there's a digestive beverage that a lot of Indians will have after the meal, which is yogurt in water. So diluted yogurt shaken up in water, and they'll put some powdered cumin in there, maybe some spices in there, and they drink it like a digestive after their meals.
When we talk about starches, people think, oh, potatoes, but that's not what's in a lot of foods. You have modified cornstarch, maltodextrin, modified food starch. Let's just touch on that and how that can, eliminating those foods can majorly help with the bloating.
We have to teach our patients, we do a lot of label reading classes with them where we show them how to look for these hidden ingredients. Is they're not understanding the technical words. It's not recognizable as a starch. It's obvious if it's pasta or it's obvious if it's a potato. But these, strange long words, we have to make them understand how to find those. And even the way a starch hits you, this is one of my sort of arguments is, sure, every culture has its traditional wisdom, and we have our traditional millets and our traditional grains and our non-GMO wheat that's been around for many centuries. And people want to talk about, oh, but we're eating what our ancestors ate. The thing is, when you powder these grains, you're taking that starch that was in the middle of it. The starch was meant for that little seed to go in the soil and in the dark where there was no sunlight to be able to make some energy for this little shoot so that it could poke enough energy out and get those little leaves up to start the photosynthesis and get energy from the sun. So that starch was meant to be given at a specific time to this plant underground. We've taken that seed and crushed it to a level fine powder, and we're getting that starch right up front. And it's really sad because people tell me, oh, proteins are difficult to digest. And I think what they're going through is exactly what you described, is the starches are hitting them first. The good bacteria in their bodies have been destroyed out by some lifestyle choices, by medications, and then they're trying to pop some prebiotic, probiotic supplements. And so they're just in this endless cycle of, medications and just not getting better.
Are you doing grain-based? Are you doing plant-based? And then also, like raw vegetables, a big part of an Indian diet, or is it just cooked vegetables?
Some cultures do a lot of salad, small quantities of just freshly chopped, really herbaceous, lovely light seasonings like cilantro, mint. We do have lovely herbs that you get. It's a warm country, there's lots of availability of greens like that. Microgreens are becoming popular here. And some of the foods will be cooked. Now, there is a spectrum here. Like sometimes it's almost like a generation gap where people my generation want their vegetables al dente, like where there's still some bite. And sometimes it's the kids and the elders who really want their vegetables cooked into a mush, almost like it's unrecognizable. There's no chewing required.
Yeah, that's, it's like you take some spinach and you just pulverize it to nothing. That's another thing, like I think could help people with their digestion is having like more salad than the grains. That can help with the bloating as well.
Yes, so we tell people go up on the fresh vegetables, go down on the grains for sure. But it's always that whole process is after we've upped the protein. So my first agenda in any consult is to up the protein first. There are times where I have to tell people, look, I can't make progress with you in your metabolic goals until we get that protein to happen at each meal. So here I sort of really make it accessible to you is instead of saying reduce your carbs, because people are like, I'm not eating any carbs. They don't think they're eating carbs, right? They're like, I'm eating home food. I'm eating freshly cooked meals. I'm eating my traditional Indian diet. So I have to say, okay, let's reduce your roti, your rice, your paratha. So I list out the Indian words for these carbohydrate predominant meals: upama, poha, kakra, etc. These long Indian names, and let's cut it to half. That's after they've upped the protein to double, because most people have enough room for me to say, just double your protein, because they're so deficient on protein. Even if I double, they're not going anywhere near excess. Yeah.
It's a tricky problem because I know in America, we have a lot less vegetarians and vegans. So, we can recommend certain animal meats, but not in other cultures. The trick is, okay, how do we do this to lower the carbs? I think you're right. We need to start with the protein, because then that's going to make it easy to do, or a lot easier.
It's going to be much harder. So I always do the protein conversation first. So I'm not taking a hungry person who's full with the 2 rotis or the 1.5 cups of rice. Let's say they're eating 2 chapatis or rotis, breads, flatbreads, or 2 cups of rice. Let's just make a number. They're eating 1 cup of vegetables and they're eating 1 cup of legumes, lentil soup, dal. I will say, can you cut the roti and the rice to 50%? And can you double the vegetables and the dal? 2 cups of those and 2 cups of those. Can you do that? And they'll be like, I'll be so full. I was like, you want that, right? You don't want to be hungry all day. So when we do the increase in the vegetables and the proteins, they themselves are able to then self-taper the carbs. And in India, again, more and more people are getting exposed to the idea of wearing a CGM, a continuous glucose monitor, which is a little wearable chip. It's a device you can wear for 2 weeks. And when they wear that, they can see what happens with their carbohydrate intake, how their glucose levels are spiking. And then we have them run the experiment to see, you had 2 servings of this grain, your glucose spiked up. Tomorrow, I want you to try and...
That's a great teaching tool.
Right. And why don't you cut that grain to 50% and then tomorrow see what happens? Then it's not them taking my word for it. It's them and their body having a conversation.
This is amazing. So for those of you that need to work with a very competent physician, I want to put your link down below where they can get a hold of you and they can learn more about your website and your program, because there's so many people out there that are on medications that need assistance, that this is a new thing for them. And I know that you have several programs, amazing book as well, that I'm getting through right now. I'm halfway through it, which is filled with just gold information. So I'm going to put those links down below. But it's been a pleasure discussing these topics. And I think there's a lot of great ideas for people to start implementing on a regular basis. And I think if people could just try this, they're going to find that it's going to work for them. I'm just so glad to talk to a medical doctor, especially an endocrinologist that is primarily focused on someone's food, because that's very rare.
Yes. Today we talked all about food, and it's the first step. It's definitely the first step to helping the body do its thing.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks so much, Doc. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Dr. Berg.